Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tamiko Brown-Nagin, Dean of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Beyond Fair Harvard, Perspectives from Black Alumni. Before we begin, I'd like to express my profound gratitude to Spencer Jourdain, Harvard class of 1961, who played a central effort in the conception and development of today's program. I'd also like to thank members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and all our annual donors whose generosity keeps Radcliffe events free and open to the public. This discussion is presented as a part of the Presidential Initiative on Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery, which President Larry Bacow launched in 2019 to understand and begin to remedy Harvard's entanglements with slavery and its enduring effects. The initiative's first phase examined Harvard's past in order to build a foundation for repair, and I served as chair of the faculty committee that led that effort. As many of you will be aware, we initially published our findings in April of 2022, and more recently in a book available from the Harvard University Press. Our report documents Harvard's direct, financial, and intellectual ties to slavery and to racist ideologies. It also contains recommendations for reparative action, which President Bacow and the Harvard Corporation accepted in full and committed unprecedented resources preserved in an endowment to implement. The work of implementing these recommendations is now underway, led by my colleague, Martha Minow, and the university's newly appointed Vice Provost for Special Projects, Sarah Bleich. Now, the report didn't only present these painful aspects of the university's history, it also begins to document the leadership, resilience, and excellence of Harvard and Radcliffe's early Black graduates, whose stories are largely unknown or underappreciated. These path-breaking individuals resisted the discrimination they encountered both on and off campus, and in doing so, they made this university stronger. More than that, through their struggles for justice and equality, many went on to reshape the social and legal landscape of the nation as a whole. Now, before we begin our discussion, I want to describe a chapter in Harvard's past, the so-called dormitory crisis, that illuminates this entwined history of discrimination and resistance. In the early 1920s, William J. Knox Jr., an incoming Black freshman, appeared for an in-person examination only to have his room assignment in the freshman dormitory revoked shortly thereafter. Knox wanted to know why, and so did Edwin B. Jourdain, a Black student at Harvard Business School who had lived in the college's freshman halls just a few years earlier. So Knox and Jourdain met with Dean Philip Chase and asked if Jourdain had lived in the freshman halls, why now was Knox apparently barred? What they learned was truly disturbing. Knox's exclusion was a matter of university policy. The freshman halls were a signature innovation of Harvard President Abbott Lawrence Lowell, and residence in those dormitories was mandatory for white students only. President Lowell reasoned that the university couldn't force white students to live alongside Black students, and thus he barred Blacks from this celebrated new feature of Harvard College life. As for Jourdain's time in the halls, it was written off as an oversight or a wartime expediency. Well, Jourdain refused to accept this, and he went directly to President Lowell. Now, it's worth pausing to consider the courage that this must have required. Edwin Jourdain's son, Spencer, himself a distinguished Harvard alumnus and a key contributor to today's program, captured it well. He said, quote, "The drama of it is one young Black man, just turned 21, confronting one of the most powerful people in the country and thus in the world, and facing him down. And he did it without fear and without hesitation." When Edwin Jourdain and Lowell met, Lowell dismissed Jourdain's objections and defended the policy. Harvard enrolled large numbers of white students from the South and West, and in Lowell's eyes, the university couldn't risk alienating them for the sake of its few Black students. If forced to choose between co-housing Black and white students and excluding Blacks from the university altogether, Lowell would choose the latter. But Jourdain persisted. He was a founding member of the Nile Club, a social organization for young African-American men at Harvard in the early 20th century, and it became a powerful driver of efforts to end segregation in Harvard's freshman halls. Newspapers across the country began to report on the club's efforts. By the summer of 1922, a group of alumni created a petition opposing the policy. Prominent Black alumni challenged the policy in the pages of the New York Times. Finally, in 1923, Harvard responded and forbade exclusion from the dorms on account of race. Jourdain and his peers are inspiring examples of African-American resistance and change making at Harvard, and their story should be far better known. They're among generations of Harvard students who push this university and the nation more broadly to live up to its highest ideals. This too is a legacy that today's Harvard students inherit, and our program this afternoon aims to celebrate this proud history. We're very fortunate to be joined by a number of distinguished Black Radcliffe and Harvard alumni who'll explore their own stories of resistance and change-making from their student days and their lives post-graduation. Let me briefly introduce them. Beth Chandler, class of 1988, is president and CEO of YW Boston, an organization dedicated to advancing equity and inclusion for women and people of color. With extensive experience in the corporate and nonprofit sectors, Beth's work spans program and business development, delivery, education, and operations, and she's also a former professional basketball player. Before joining YW Boston, Beth was vice president at the Achievement Network, a national education nonprofit. She's also held roles at Massachusetts Legal Assistance Corporation, Neighborhood Works America, Bank of America, and the Urban Institute. Antoinette Nwandu, class of 2002, is a writer for stage, television, and film. She wrote and produced the Broadway play Passover. A film version of Passover, directed by Spike Lee, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and South by Southwest, and is now streaming on Amazon Prime. Antoinette is a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including a McDowell Fellowship, a Lilly Award, a Whiting Award, and a Lorraine Hansberry Playwriting Award. Her work has been supported by the Sundance Theater Lab and Ignition Fest, as well as several others. Baratunde Thurston, class of 1999, is an Emmy-nominated storyteller and producer whose work explores the intersection of race, democracy, technology, and climate. He's a founding partner of the new media startup Puck, the host of the PBS series American Outdoors with Baratunde Thurston, and the creator and host of How to Citizen with Baratunde, which Apple selected as one of its favorite podcasts of 2020. He's also the author of the New York Times bestselling memoir, How to Black, and he delivered the acclaimed TED Talk, How to Deconstruct Racism, One Headline at a Time, which MSNBC Brian Williams called one of the greatest TED Talks of all time. And finally, John Woodford, class of 1963, is a journalist who's written for Ebony, Jet, the New York Times, and Muhammad Speaks. He's also edited numerous publications of the University of Michigan. John and his fellow African-American classmates' experiences were chronicled in the excellent book, The Last Negroes at Harvard. The Class of 1963 and the 18 Young Men Who Changed Harvard Forever, written by Kent Garrett, another member of that landmark class, and his co-author, Jean Ellsworth. This panel will be moderated by my colleague, Randall Kennedy, who is the Michael R. Klein Professor at Harvard Law School. Randall's scholarship examines constitutional law, civil rights, and the intersection of race and legal institutions. He is the author of numerous publications, and his most recent book is Say It Loud on Race, History, and Culture. A former law clerk to U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, Randall is a member of the American Law Institute, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Philosophical Association. I'm grateful to each of you for joining us today and for sharing your experiences. Before I turn things over to Randy, I'd first like to invite Edwin Jourdain's son, Spencer, to say a few words. Spencer, as I mentioned, was a key advisor as we organized today's program. He's also the author of The Dream Dancers, a 2-volume history of the Jourdain family. With that, Spencer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tomiko. I'm honored to be here this afternoon and help celebrate these inspiring stories of Black leadership and resistance at Harvard. I also want to thank you for uplifting the story of my father, Edwin Jourdain Jr., and the Nile Club, and all that that great generation of Harvard alumni accomplished. As you and I have explored, they reshaped both Harvard and the nation, but their story has been submerged and forgotten for too long. Thank you. Generations of Black students have left a powerful mark on this institution, changing it for the better. Today, Harvard students, particularly students of color, need to know about their predecessors, what they faced, what they overcame, and the incredible things they achieved. Your remarks today remind me when I was a student and a member of the Harvard Glee Club. And we sang one spring evening at sunset on the steps of Widener Library. The air over the yard was full of mist and small raindrops. And at the end, we sang a song that celebrated the great leaders and artistic creators of ages. And the song ended saying, "And some there be who have no memorial, who've perished as though they had never been, but their cause lives forever." So today, as we hear from around the world, we believe that we should add our verse to that song. And I think that perhaps our anthem today should be of our creating an environmentally sustainable planet and finally completing the work of those who came before us to establish an equal and mutually fulfilling human future. Thank you again, and I look forward to the discussion. And it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Professor Randall Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jourdain, and I very much appreciated your comments. And I want to echo your appreciation to the Dean for relaying that anecdote about Harvard history. I look forward very much to the discussion, and I really want to get right to it. So let's begin. Baratunde, was Harvard worth it to you? Start us off.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was worth it. Next question. No, it's good to be here. Thank you, everybody. I clearly did not get the memo about representing some red within the color scheme. I'm up here rocking all this Yale blue. Is not my choice. I'm on set. It was other people's design choices, but I remain loyal to Harvard. I'm proud to be here representing the great class of 1999, and good to be with all these distinguished homies. Harvard was definitely worth it. I didn't always think it would be. I didn't always want to go to a place like Harvard. I come from Washington, D.C., Chocolate City, graduated from high school in '95 at Sidwell Friends, and I'd been at Sidwell for 6 years. And that gave me a certain grounding and exposure to a whole different world, a world of money, a world of white people, a world of children who had cars waiting for them before they could drive. This was not the DC that I grew up in, but you cross town a little bit and you have a whole nother reality with the children of World Bank officials and things like that, and presidents as well. So by the time I was ready to apply to college, I was pretty good on the primarily white institution front. I was like, I get it. I've suffered some slings and arrows. I understand the basic approach. Hello, Howard University. Hello, Morehouse. Let's go. And I had a homie from 2 years ahead of me, Paul Hodgson, class of '97 and Sidwell '95. And he said, you got to check this place out. And so my mom and me and our dog, we did this road trip, in this family station wagon. And we visited MIT and we visited Yale. Very dark, very gothic, very moody, broody, not good vibes. And at Harvard, I felt it. I felt really like it was a place I could be myself. And so I got excited about Harvard, and mutually Harvard got excited about me. We accepted each other, and I enrolled and enlisted, which is sometimes what it felt like. I wouldn't have been able to really enjoy myself as much as I was able to at Harvard without the 6-year prequel of boot camp at a similar institution. I felt like I was socialized and pre-adapted to the environment to some degree. I wouldn't have been able to make it without the support of not just my classmates in '99, but the kids, especially in '97, particularly when I honor Dave Brown, who we just lost a few weeks ago, a fantastic human being and lawyer who helped me stay at the Harvard Crimson when I was getting buoyed from other Black students. Don't go messing with the Crimson, it's racist. And Dave gave me a different perspective on what I could offer and what I could receive by staying engaged with an institution like that. And it's clearly had a big effect on my life, as did he. And I wouldn't have been able to make it if I hadn't also had mad jobs while I was at Harvard. Computer user assistant, software tester, dorm crew, anything that was necessary, I was willing to do within the bounds of the law to pay for those books, which weren't included. And so in conclusion, yes, it was worth it. I'm happy to get into further detail. I'll just tag on that this report, this acknowledgement of the history that the university has taken on is wonderful. And I wish every other institution would do something similar. The recommendations in particular, I'm looking for the fine print part where it says they'll pay me back for all the tuition that I had to pay myself when I went there. I didn't find that part, but I'm hoping, Professor Kennedy, that you can help me make that case in addition. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beth, how do you respond?
Hi, and it's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story. And I agree with Baratunde that I would say, yes, it was worth it. When I grew up in Connecticut, actually not too far from Yale. So I knew I did not want to go there. I wanted to get a little further away from home. And what I was looking for in a college was, there were 4 things. So one was service. I knew I wanted to do something related to service. And the person that I met with when I did my alumni interview talked a lot about how service was instilled in him through his experience at Harvard. So that resonated with me. I was a basketball player and I was excited to play for the team at Harvard. I really liked the team. I liked the coach. I wanted an institution where I would feel academically challenged. And I was also looking for a place where once I had that degree, no one could take it away. And no matter where I went in the country or the world, people would know where I went. And so those were the 4 things I was looking for. And those are 4 things that I found in going to Harvard. It wasn't always the easiest 4 years, but it was certainly worth it. And I think certainly being Black, being a woman, being gay, being, sort of on the lower, like mid to lower class. I mean, my family, we never missed a meal, but we certainly didn't have a lot of money. So I think all of those different identities had distinct challenges being at Harvard and for my career there. But overall, things, even though it was difficult at times, I'm happy I went through it. I'm so supportive of both my basketball teammates who helped me through, and it was great to have a community with whom I could connect and have shared purpose. And also the Black Student Union played an extraordinarily important role in my feeling like I could be a part of Harvard. That was a community where I truly felt like I could be me. And so those, again, basketball and the BSA were extraordinarily helpful.
Thank you. Antoinette, what say you?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today on this panel. You know what, this question, is Harvard worth it? I was thinking about it in sort of 3 different categories. And I would say for me in my life right now, relationally, Harvard was definitely worth it. I came from the West Coast. I grew up in Los Angeles. Much like Baratunde, I went to a primarily white institution for high school. So I was definitely socialized. I definitely understood what I was getting into when I was accepted to Harvard. And so the people when I was thinking about this question, the people who are in my life today, who are my friends, my deepest colleagues, some of my deepest confidants, when people say that one of the best resources out of Harvard are the people, that's obviously what I experience on a daily basis. So in that sense, yes, my Harvard education was absolutely worth it. That said, and maybe this is because I am a playwright, maybe this is because I'm a little bit of a contrarian. As far as my career goes, and as far as I would say my mental health and my self-care journey, Harvard was not particularly worth it. The struggle was real. I come from a lower middle class family. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. I have 2, siblings who haven't even graduated from high school. I come from a very, very poor family. Nobody in my family really expected me to go to college or really cared whether I went to college one way or another. This is definitely a journey that I've been on alone. So in a lot of ways, even though I was socialized and I was sort of externally able to make it on a day-to-day level at Harvard, there were wounds that were being inflicted on my psyche, on my sense of self, on my voice, on my gut instinct that I have not healed from until much, much later. And so sometimes when I look back on my Harvard career and the fact that I'm in an industry now that doesn't really care where I went to school, like if you can write a good play, if you can write a good TV show, then you're going to move forward. At least in my experience. So Harvard doesn't really come up in my day-to-day life as far as my career goes. And when I look back on my self-care journey, I think actually, it's interesting that Baratunde brought up the HBCUs, because at my school, again, because I didn't have anybody in my family who really understood college at all, I was only reliant on my college counselors to sort of guide me. So the conversation about HBCUs never came up. So I look back on it and there's a part of me that mourns a lost opportunity, I think, to sort of find myself among Black people. So I can definitely say that I'm grateful for Harvard. I'm grateful for the people that I met. I'm grateful for, that stamp of approval, whatever that means. If I ever want to be a banker, I know I can get a job. But was it worth it? No, not necessarily. Thanks.
Thank you. John, what's your reaction to the question?
Well, this is mainly a Harvard audience, I assume, right? So I want to say that for truth of the disclosure, at one time we were going to answer the question, are you happy you went to Harvard? But the younger people nixed that question. I'm happy I went to Harvard, but I can see why maybe they resisted. First, it kind of got my hackles up that they didn't want to approach it that way. But when I went there, you could earn your semester's money in the summer pretty much, no matter how much money your family came from. My family, I did have my father was a physician. I wasn't hurting for money, but I liked to earn my own money. But nobody who was going to Harvard then really had to sweat having enough money. You could earn enough and you weren't going to be burdened with debt. So I'm sure that in the generations that followed us, just because of the economy and the country and what's happened to it, that question about worth it became a lot more sharp, and I can sympathize with why people would look at it that way, but we didn't really. I think when I came from a small town in southwestern Michigan. It was then probably about 20% Black American, and probably 20% many who came from Mississippi, and then the white folks tended to come from Arkansas. They had moved up after the war, and then you had the other varieties, different kinds of other regular white folks, and you also had many immigrants from the captive nations and so all that sort of stuff. It was a real melting pot. A lot of Italians. So I was used to being in school with a lot of different kinds of people, and I was used to getting along with them. And so it didn't seem, that wasn't the stretch. The thing was that Harvard was supposed to be a school for, hard subjects and great teachers and smart fellow students. So that kind of appealed to me. Also, I had my mother's uncle had gone to Harvard in the class of 1913. And so I knew Harvard was there. My counselor in high school told me that people from our background, and this is a regular white American counselor, but he meant Midwesterners, don't like it in a place like that, because they have different kinds of people out there in the East, and you might find you don't like to be around people like that. So, but I ignored him and I went anyway. And I did have a really fine time. Of course, the era that you're going to a college is important. We had the civil rights era just starting, 59, 60. And I took part in the boycotts because right before I went to Harvard, I happened to go to Virginia, and I met two white high school classmates of mine there. We were going to go to an amusement park. And when I went to the park with them, I couldn't go to the amusement park. We hit our noses against the segregation, Jim Crow segregation at the amusement park in Virginia. So that gave me a dose of what the country was really like, that growing up where I did, weren't quite as aware of what was going on down south. Then my roommate, Travis Williams, was a Black student from Durham, where the sit-ins were originally. So he educated me about those, and before you know it, I'm out picketing and boycotting. Later on, when I graduated, we went to Tougaloo for the summer of '64. But then, of course, then there's the Vietnam War movement. The anti-war movement was kind of perking up at the same time. So that marked, I think, my era at Harvard, those two big national and international events. And so a lot of the things I did in life after that have all been first out of seeing that the country was racist. The fact that the country's got slavery baked into the Constitution means that I'm not, who could be surprised to find Harvard and other institutions, implicated in the structure. They also, of course, the lies that we were told about the Vietnam War. We had the teach-in movements and other things, and you learn about the deception practiced by the leaders of our country. And so that's what made me kind of want to be a journalist. I actually did go to, I went to grad school here and got a master's in English literature. And I love the fact that I learned English literature here, because that's what I like to do, read plays and novels and essays and so forth. And I had first wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, but I switched. And the professors I had, the grad students I had here, I never had any moment of friction or feeling any racist condescension of any sort, even though we found out, of course, that David Reisman, I'll say that we had one of our classmates who did a study of us. We had 18 of us, which doesn't seem like a lot now. Back then it was like explosive. Not even 1% of the student body was Black, but it was like, oh, wow, look at all of these people on campus now. And David Reisman didn't think that we were, it turned out that we probably were going to be intellectually comfortable and very successful at Harvard. He was supposed to be, of course, the progressive sociologist. So, and I won't get into that now. But anyway, I love the fact that I went here because I met so many great other students of all kinds of backgrounds. And that's been the real treasury to me, is my fellow students that I met. The same goes though for high school or any other place. It's your peers. You want to meet wonderful peers. That's what I got at Harvard.
Okay. You all represent classes from 1963. Well, there's 1963, 1999, 2002, 1998. That's quite a substantial spread. I want to go back to you again, John. You mentioned at the outset, you hinted at what you perceive to be a sort of maybe a generational divide. Do you perceive that? Do you? We've had in listening to your peers here, in listening to your younger peers here, do you feel that the Harvard that's part of your memory is maybe different than the Harvard that is part of their memory? And after you speak, I want to pose that same question to your co-panelists.
Well, I think so, without being sort of a fuddy-duddy about, you know, when we were back there, everything was better and all that sort of thing. But I try to be objective about it. But I do feel that it's not anything to do with them. It has to do with our country. I think our country has backslid in so many ways that even though we had a lot of problems, we were pushing against them and feeling we were, getting the upper hand in many areas in the movement. So that was just sort of in the spirit of the times. And I think now, what with the economic contraction and the war, the Pentagon's got all the money, and public education, which I went through, is being shrunk, and every area of public life is under assault. And the money, you have the imbalance in wealth and income. So these problems, I think, affect the younger generation. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, Baratunde, what do you say? Do you perceive some sort of generational change?
Yes and no. I think I was struck by John reminding us of the era in the country when he arrived, in terms of the cusp of massive civil rights activities that, of course, have been going on for a while, but really starting to peak. When I arrived on campus, there was a different kind of civil rights movement happening, really the anti-civil rights movement in some ways, as exhibited by the Bell Curve book and these public challenges with the veneer of intellectual credibility that still do the same old dirty dance of dehumanizing Black folk and making us feel like we don't belong. Embodied even more personally by Professor Harvey Mansfield at the time, who made no secret of his disdain for our presence on campus and the fact that we didn't truly deserve to be there, that we were only there because of affirmative action. And now this, Ivy League dominated Supreme Court has, is likely to make its way to undoing that. So there's similarities and sort of overlaps, or at least shared coordinates of our experience. But the money is a big difference and a big deal. And the vast numbers of people who are expected to go to college from the 60s to the late 90s and into the 2000s is really, really different. And so what is the role of Harvard in the larger society? I loved your joke, Antoinette, about if I want to be a banker, it would have been worth it. And so Harvard also tries to, maybe not actively, but certainly effectively, create a certain type of alumni, a certain type of citizen, a certain type of American, a certain type of worker that will contribute to a lot of status quo things. And so given the great divides that we're all experiencing, it's a larger question about, what's Harvard's place and role and worth and function in this society. And I think we can share asking that question, but it feels different generationally to some of John's earlier points. Thanks for the question.
Okay. Beth?
Yeah, it's hard to add. I mean, they both, John and Baratunde, both of all the points they made resonate with me. And I will say, I think for me, going through Harvard at the time that I did, apartheid was a big deal. And that's what we were protesting a lot of. And in reflecting, I feel like that was a time where maybe, and certainly I'll speak, I felt like assimilating was better, right? We had seen a fair amount of progress up until that point. And so I think I had been raised in a way to think about, okay, it's going to continue to get better and go along to get along. And I think, generations after me, it's not the same. You have to push, right? And I wasn't raised to be a pusher. The pusher sort of came before me and after me. And I think I was sort of in that group where we had seen progress and we thought if we just, joined in, that it was going to continue. And it is apparent that it has not. And it is apparent that we, particularly, folks, we have to speak out, right? And there's a time where you can maybe try to get along, but there's a time when you need to speak out. And I think we are now more in a time where it's important to be speaking out and to really use and exercise the agency that we have to make change. And I think about the story that was shared earlier of the gentleman's father who, went to the president, and there was a lot at risk for him. He could have gotten kicked out of the school for all he knew. But he was willing to exercise his agency to try to make change. And I think that is where we are now for a variety of reasons, where it is more important to really understand what is happening within the systems around us at Harvard and to figure out how do we push those systems to really get to change so that we can feel that we are really a part of the social fabric of the university and that they're not doing us a favor by letting us in.
Antoinette?
Yeah, I mean, much like Beth, there's not really much I can add. I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. The comment that Baratunde made about the money, I think really, really resonates with me. And I spent 8 years in my professional life working at a community college in New York, teaching lower income New York students of all ages who were, on the path to get an AA. And during that time, the conversation about money for, kids that are paying $8,000 a semester, the financial burden that college puts on young people, when you're 21 years old and you are tens and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to go to college, it makes me question not just is Harvard worth it, but is college in the way that this country sets it up worth it? We don't have, very many vocational schools. We look down on people that go to community colleges, things like that. So it's not just Harvard. I don't want to, say that I'm like leaning in, oh, Harvard wasn't worth it. But I do think that there are some systemic problems with education, obviously, and college education in the United States that just give me pause as far as the money point goes. But then also to speak to Beth's point, I think, look, at the end of the day, a question like, was Harvard worth it or not, is a bit moot because we all went to Harvard and we can't change that fact. I am a Harvard graduate. And so rather than sort of focusing on the parts that weren't worth it, I am sort of challenged and sort of invigorated by the fact that because I am a Harvard graduate, what sort of responsibilities and what sort of agency and what sort of visibility do I have, do we all have? I think, very quickly about the, the divest Harvard, the divesting in fossil fuels, or, the different, when I was on campus, it was all about, trying to get equal pay for adjuncts or trying to get equal pay for some of the groundspeople who, and the people who worked in the dining halls, very simple living wage kinds of fights. And so it's like, it's worth it if I can use what Harvard has given me to make the institution better. Okay. Then it becomes worth it because I'm doing the work to change what the institution is.
Our wonderful audience is sending questions, and here's one that I think is particularly pertinent. What advice would you give current students of color to maintain their dignity and sense of worth at Harvard? This is certainly a question that all of you have, grappled with at various points. At this moment, what would you say to a student who asked you this question? Imagine a student who's just got here to Harvard and who put this question to you. What would you say to that student? Baratunde, what would you say to that student?
They're lucky to have you. I used to joke when I told people.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
They are lucky to have you.
Okay.
When I used to tell people that I was going to Harvard, as a student there, I talked to my mom's friends who worked in the federal government in DC, like a lot of Black people in DC do.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, you got accepted to Harvard. I'm like, yeah, and I accepted Harvard. Like, it's mutual. And I think what Beth said, this feeling of deservedness and that someone's doing us a favor is a mentality we got to learn how to shed. So many of these systems, whether it's company diversity efforts, military, higher education, but especially companies in higher education, they want us to feel like they've got power and they just get to trickle it out to us. And then we're really lucky to be a part of their club. When what's really happening is they're really lucky that we want to be a part of their club. We make their club cool. We make it relevant to the future. We add a level of dynamism. We bring things that they don't even know they don't know that they need to stay relevant. And so the overwhelming message by the art on the walls at Harvard, by the legacy, by the 1683, by the Fair Harvard, is like, you're the lucky one. And so to maintain a sense of dignity and belonging, know that it's the other way around as much, if not more, and carry that. You don't have to scream it out loud, but scream it inside to yourself that they're the ones who are lucky to have you.
Others, Beth, what would you say to that student?
I would add to that, find your supports, right? Find the people who will support you, who believe in you, who know you, and who you don't have to prove yourself to, right? Who know you have nothing to prove, and that, excuse me, that you are worthy, you deserve to be there. It can be hard, not only at Harvard, but in the world, to feel sometimes like we belong and we're worth it because of all the messages that we get everywhere that we are other than, right? We are not good enough. And so it is important that we know that that's the way the system is set up, and to not fall for that and to believe in ourselves. Because if we don't believe in us, who will? Right? So believe in yourself and surround yourself with others that believe in you and that you're not fighting to prove your worth every day.
Beth, can I push back on you just a little bit? Because I've heard that before, and I'll just go to my own experience. I mean, there have been situations in which I've been at a place and actually my classmates, my peers, were in fact ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
They had more skills. They had, they had more knowledge. And I didn't think it was, and I recognized that. I saw that and felt, gosh, I'm going to have to work a lot harder to catch up. Looking back, I feel good that I recognized that they were ahead and that I was going to have to work harder to catch up. They were ahead of me on day one. I'd say by day 360, however, things, I had caught up. What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that, because that's based on a skill, right? Versus just based on your color or your gender or your sexual orientation, right? And so there are always going to be people that are going to be better. There are going to be people that are, not going to be as strong, right? We all have strengths that we bring, but it's not because of the color of my skin or the gender or my sexual orientation that I am good, better than, or less than, right? And that is all my point is to, not feel that you are less than because of how you identify, right? And to believe that, yes, somebody may have, more skills, but you can accumulate those skills. But often we are made to believe that we have deficits, right? And it's not that it's a skill that we can't learn. It's you're less than because of who you are or how you identify. And my point is that we cannot believe. That is what it gets in our way sometimes, and certainly has gotten in my way of feeling less than, not because I didn't necessarily have the skills as somebody else, but because of how people made me feel, because of how I identify.
Okay.
Right? So there are going to be people that are better, and I can work to, develop those skills. And that's okay, but I shouldn't feel that I'm less than just because of my identity. So that's my point.
Okay.
You can
That's what-
racialize, if you racialize these things in a way that is unrealistic, you're letting a racist system dominate you, really. I looked at a Harvard publication the other day. There was a white woman student who was a great swimmer who's had, she said, imposter syndrome at Harvard because they were treating her as an athlete. Or sorry, but the Harvard professor said, for an athlete, you wrote that pretty well, and it made her feel bad as an insult, and she had many doubts about her her academic skills. When I went to school, we had people, Midwestern guys whose fathers had been prominent wherever they were. Maybe they might have been alumnus, whatever they were. Anyway, they came here. A lot of them felt when they got here, several of them went into therapy because they felt that maybe they weren't good enough and things were harder than they were in high school. They were going to have to work harder than they did, and they had lower grades than they'd ever got before. This happens. So it happens to many, many kinds of students, not just here, but all over the country. So you got to tell these people, get on your hind legs, stand up and work hard, and to figure out something that you can do and work hard and study, and you're going to come out okay. Don't let the SOBs wear you down.
Antoinette, what advice would you give to current students of color to maintain their dignity and sense of worth at Harvard?
I mean, I think much like Beth, I would say I was definitely thinking about finding a support system. And I think for me, the reason that's so important is look, college is hard. No matter where you go. A lot of times you're leaving home, you're leaving the familiarity of, a life where other people are making choices for you. There's a certain amount of freedom. There's a ton of stress. You have to regulate your time. You have, you're meeting all new people. So no matter where you go, it's a milestone, it's a transition. And when you're going through that experience, you need people around you who are going to mirror back to you the best version of who you are. When you're, in the middle of the night and you're cramming because you didn't study, and you have a paper to write and all of these things, and you're stressed, and it's like the bow is going to break. Who is going to hold you through those moments? The support system that you have over those 4 years, I think, is a make or break. So just find those people who are going to hold you down, and people that you will hold down in those moments as well. That's the best thing. And also just have a ton of money.
How have each of you felt about Harvard's actions over the past year or two or three vis-a-vis Harvard and slavery, vis-a-vis Harvard and affirmative action, vis-a-vis Harvard and the creation of leadership within the Harvard system? How have you all felt in the past few years about the actions that Harvard's taken? I'll start with you, John. What's been your reaction to all that?
Well, I'm going to have to see how it all comes out, because I'm a little bit, I tend to be skeptical and a little bit suspicious of the depth and sincerity, not just of Harvard's, but of the country as a whole, because the country as a whole is not doing well by poor people, especially Black people, brown poor people, working class people. Many people in this country are getting ground down and abused and not served right by the country itself. So they need to do, I believe that what's going to help Black people most in this country is going to be something that would be more like a New Deal, a national program. It's got to help everyone who, who's in a more precarious system position, and it needs to be investing from bottom up. I would like to see more going to people who are in need, and especially in our public education system. I'd like to see massive investments, third of the Pentagon budget or more, and take it out of the Pentagon budget, because that's what it's really going to take. I think there are people in the country who saw masses of people only as what they could be working for them and paying them a minimum wage. And if they don't need them because of high-tech developments, they don't care what happens. People are going to be warehoused unless the people get hold of the government. So Harvard, as an elitist institution, I didn't trust it. I didn't think it fought against the Bakke decision, which the Bakke decision was the Trojan horse to wipe out affirmative action. And I think they were ready, they and other institutions were willing to see this little slippage, give them a little bit on the affirmative action, weaken it a little bit, and let the Supreme Court get that leg in there. And now you see what has happened now. So I think that these institutions need to band together, and they need to fight directly. They need to accuse these Supreme Court people openly of being the foul and reactionary and scheming and paid off legalist hucksters that we have on that court. And they need to fight them tooth and nail. They can't just, they can't be wishy-washy about it and talk about our institutions of democracy, they need to fight. So that's what I want to see. I want to see some fighting by Harvard against these reactionaries.
You don't think that Harvard's been fighting?
Not really, no. I think it's a genteel. I think a lot of it's lip service, a lot of it's to look good. I don't know. I got to see a lot more. I got to see a whole lot more. I got to see it where it's comes out in the wash, where you get to see materially gains. Not like, we tried, but they beat us this time. They beat us back there. We're going to compromise. They need to, denounce the people and expose the people behind these assaults on not just affirmative action, but you have to start there. That's a key one. That's a key one right now.
Okay. Baratunde, how have you felt?
I want John to get everything he wants, because that'll make a lot of us happy. That was amazing, brother. So verbal retweet, while we can still retweet before Elon crashes the ship. The affirmative action thing, I'm not a lawyer. I listened to some of the arguments. I was unimpressed by Harvard's lawyers, just the way they kind of approached it on the religious question. Like, no, we don't count the religious people by number, though. They just seem unprepared for some of the more obvious points of counterattack. On the acknowledgement of the slave history, points. I want every institution to do that. I think it's a good model to say, like, we can acknowledge our shadows and our sins and our misdeeds and still be whole. In fact, we're more whole because we acknowledge them. It's what we need to do as a nation and in our curriculum and all that. So I think it's a much bigger step than most institutions have made, 50 years before and earlier. So I appreciate that. And then what I would really want to see, given the limited time we have as a species on this earth, and the decreasing comfort of that time due to human activities, financed and pursued in the name of colonialism and economic extraction, is get right by the climate and by the future. And that means, a total assessment of all the university's power, its investment power, its lobbying and political power, its real estate infrastructure power, its food sourcing power, its energy generation power, and turn it up to 12, 13, 14, 15, and seek to lead in that area in the same way that they seek to lead in outbidding for the top professor to run a department, in the area they seek to lead in raising funds to put somebody's name on a building. Make sure that building actually contributes more, to our environment than it takes away from it. And they've done some good things, but it is not enough by far.
Okay. We don't have much time, but I would like to hear from Antoinette on this, and also from Beth on this. Again, this question of what's your reaction? And the reason why I ask it is you know, this has been a completely open, transparent discussion. There is no hiding of the ball here. And I think that one of the things that's, you know, really interesting about a program like this is that people can be, you know, really straightforward. So what's your straightforward response to the question, you know, how have you felt about Harvard's recent activity in the race area? Antoinette.
Well, I mean, I think the primary goal of any institution is to continue itself. So institutions are naturally going to be conservative because they just want to continue. They want to remain. I understand that. And yet, much like Baratunde, I wish that Harvard would lean forward. I wish that Harvard would use the agency and the credibility and the name that it has to be a real progressive force, not only in race, but most importantly in climate justice, because, you know, as much as I love the acknowledgement of slavery, an acknowledgement of past wrong does not require present change, right? But the climate situation requires present change. And so if this institution is acknowledging harm against Black bodies, then it needs to also acknowledge the harm against the literal body of the planet. And so at a certain point, I think as alumni, we can just never be satisfied. We can never be satisfied with an institution that shows up but doesn't lead in the way that, like, we obviously needed to lead.
Okay. Beth, you have 1 minute.
All right, I will agree with everyone else. I think Harvard can be more bold. I think it can use its platforms and its resources to really move conversations forward, and not just conversations, but action, right? Because that's what really matters, is what is the action that Harvard is going to take that may ruffle some feathers, but it can do it given the power and the resources that and the platforms that it has. I will give kudos to the university. They hired the first Black woman basketball coach in perhaps all of the Ivy League in all of its history. And that to me was terrific. That they did that. So I will give, you know, kudos where kudos are due. So that for basketball, yes, but for everything else, I think Harvard can and should be far more bold in the action that it takes.
Thank you all very much for your commentary. And I'd like to thank the audience for their questions. This concludes our program. Again, the panelists, thanks so much. Excellent, illuminating, honest conversation. The audience, thanks for your excellent and numerous questions. Today's program has been recorded and will be posted on the Radcliffe website, radcliffe.harvard.edu. Please visit the Radcliffe website for additional information about all of the panel's speakers, as well as the schedule for future Radcliffe programs, and to see videos of past events. Thank you again for being with us today. And everyone, take care. Be well.